Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. This is Isaac. This is episode 21. In this episode, Jess and I talk about our good friend, the late Bob Tangora. We talk about meeting Bob and some experiences training with him. If you want to hear more about Bob and his style of training and his Tai Chi and stuff, and my take on it and Jess's take on it, we did a discussion about his book, The Internal Structure of Cloud Hands, where we go into some of the stuff. We didn't obviously get to all of it, but we got a good chunk of it. So that'll be out same time as this on our Patreon, so you can check that out. And we did a interview with our good friend and mentor Lee Berkins recently, and that's going to be out fairly soon. That will also be on the Patreon, so look out for that. Okay, hope you enjoy the episode, and take care.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. We're working on reading Opening the Energy Gates of Your Body. And now we've reached the part of the book where we're getting into the cloud hands practice. And part of that discussion, we wanted to talk about a mentor and teacher of ours who's a practitioner of Opening the Energy Gates and a lot more, Bob Tangora, who passed away last year in 2019. And Bob was a mentor to Isaac and a friend to Isaac and I. I met him back at the retreats back in the day, and he was one of the folks who was specialized in Tai Chi, and he had traveled quite a bit learning Tai Chi from a variety of sources. And his knowledge was great, and his abilities were really great too. And so we wanted to spend some time talking about Bob as we got more into the cloud hands practices. Let's see, Isaac, didn't you meet Bob back at one of the Anvil Ranch retreats?
Yeah, I first met him in '94, I think. It was a Tai Chi is meditation retreat. And he stuck out because he was one of the few guys there that could, really throw people around. It was like, I'm going to go check that
He's a
dude
big
out.
dude, too. He's a somewhat imposing figure.
He was a big boy, that's true. Yeah, so we met there. It was a meditation retreat, so we didn't really we didn't get to know each other too well that year, but after a few more years, we saw each other, and then we started to get a little closer. And he used to throw me up against the wall. That was our main interaction, was doing push hands and me getting thrown against either brick or concrete wall was his particular favorite.
So that reminds me of Yang style, of Cheng Man Ching or Yang Shao Zhang style, where they throw you against a mattress on a wall or something like that. And he had done a bunch of Yang style under, I think, the teacher Fu Zhongwen, the nephew of Yang Cheng Fu.
Right. So he started at the Chen Man Ching school in New York, and then went to Asia, and ended up training with a bunch of people there. And I think Fu Zhongwen was his main traditional Yang style teacher, and then he met Tak in Malaysia, and that was his main sort of Chen Man Ching hookup at that point. And then later I think delved into the Wu style with Bruce and with Wang Hao Da.
So he had a well-rounded Tai Chi curriculum. Yeah. And I think
one of the things was the first time we really did any kind of martial stuff was actually in a Xingyi class, and he came to a Xingyi class in Fairfax, and punched me in the stomach and threw me across the room. And I said, "Oh, you must have done this before." And he sort of said, "Well, I've done Tai Chi." And I thought, well, that's he's the first person that I've met that with Tai Chi could really give you a wallop. So that was kind of informative. And then we kind of developed a friendship after that. And it was a bit of a sort of older brother type of martial brother type of situation where he would explain to me what Bruce was doing, and sort of break things down and that kind of stuff. So that was real helpful along the way.
So you get a chance to sort of bounce your ideas off him and try it out and check with him on stuff as an older brother, kind of uncle.
Yeah, and I mean, Bruce isn't always, when he answers your questions, it's not always maybe the answer you were hoping for. So it's nice to have somebody that can break it down and explain it to you like you're an idiot. Sometimes that's helpful. And Bob was more than happy to do that. So,
He is sort of a sharp-minded, like being a lawyer, he always had an analytical mind or sort of harsh, truthfulness or something like that, where he'd just rip into you if he felt like it. He didn't apologize for shit.
Yeah, he would cut to the quick if necessary, but always in I think in a fairly caring way. But yeah, sometimes I think he came off a little abrasive, but I wouldn't know anything about that. So.
I mean, and it reminds me of how it's at those retreats at Anvil, there was a number of quite a few older experts around who are masters in their own right to some degree. And that reminds me of Bob's friend and his sort of mentor, David Barbero.
Right.
Was he around at those?
Yeah, I met David a few times. He was, I kind of joked that he and Bob were kind of like you and me, that they were, similar skill levels, but different areas of specialty, And I made a comment to David about how I'd seen him pushing somebody around. I said, "Oh, you're that old guy that was pushing so-and-so around." And he kind of looked at me sideways and said, "Old guy." And then, I picked myself up off the floor and it was like, okay, so he was much smaller than Bob. He was not a big guy. He was, and so he was much more he had more of a Wu style flavor to, his stuff than Bob did. Bob's, big and young guy.
Big frame. Yeah. Interesting. And so I remember meeting Bob for the first time at the Tai Chi instructor training that you guys were putting on. And I came for the, non-instructor weekend to be instructed for a week, I believe. And that was at Ions in Marin there.
It was 99 or 2000, something like that.
Might have been 99, man. The summer of 99.
I think it was 99, yeah.
Yeah, and it was really hot out up there, just baking in the oak trees and madrones. And I remember some sort of older guys who seemed to know what they were doing. And that was like Eric Peters, Bob, and a number of other old timers who've been around a long time.
Sure.
And I remember, we didn't really know each other much at that point. So I remember you going by, but we didn't hang out much.
No, I remember seeing you and being like, "Oh, I want to go do martial arts with Jess," and then Bruce making me go and correct somebody's form and just
I'm sure you were willing. Give me a smile.
It was a those type of trainings that that thing was 4 weeks long.
Yeah, that was a brutal training.
It was grueling. I mean, by the end of it, it was like I didn't want to look at a Tai Chi form for 6 months. I mean,
because I only came for that week, but I remember he was especially putting you through your paces and making you do all kinds of extra training because of your insolence and so on. And I remember one highlight from that was the late night Tai Chi combat test where they had the trucks pulled up with the headlights on the woods, and then people had to come out in pairs and demonstrate techniques while he was sitting there and just critiquing everyone's performance. And that seemed especially just draining, after that whole trip.
Well, and I think I can't remember exactly the sequence of events, but I think we did something before that, and then we did that, and then after that we had to have a big long talk. And that's when I just fucking lost it. And, that's why he made me stand on one leg. Just stand on one leg for 2 hours the next day. But yeah, no, that whole training thing, that the martial thing was basically going through each move of the form. And then you had to you had your partner and you had to take turns doing applications. And I remember a bunch of the people didn't know the applications, and so you can, there's a video of it somewhere and you can see me in the background showing people what the applications were. Sort of
sometimes people don't pay that much attention.
Yeah, and and he kept telling me to stop doing shingy, and I hit the guy, what do you care?
Yeah, but moving on to Bob again, I remember meeting up at that Bagua training in Shinoa, and that's where I kind of got to know Bob, because all of us stayed out at your cabin in Boonville there on the Mendocino, rural Mendocino, which was quite a rustic experience for sure. And so I got to have some conversation with him, and and you sort of bounce ideas around with him, and really appreciate it, and was always felt, I don't know, a great feeling for him. He's always sort of a mentor to me, and I could always trust to get a good answer from him about stuff. And
Yeah, it's a real loss. I mean, he was one of those people that really had a solid, understanding of Tai Chi, and it's just, that's just a bummer that he passed, and wasn't able to pass it on a little more.
yeah, I mean, I know he taught out of New Mexico, right? What was his spot?
Yeah, he was in Santa Fe, and I mean, I had him come out here a few times and do workshops and
Yeah.
stuff, but mostly he taught there. Yeah.
And did he originally joined up with the Energy Arts School in New Mexico when
I actually
Bruce
don't
was
know
there?
if he started. I think actually he might have started after Bruce left. Um, I think David started before Bruce, with Bruce when he was in Santa Fe. But I actually think Bob
Mm.
was. I think that's when Bob was in law school or something like that. So he actually met up with David, and then David introduced him to Bruce.
Mm.
And I'm not sure. I mean, I think David had been around a long, since probably the late '80s or something like that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
good 10 years by the time I met him.
So I know, what do you think of stood out about Bob's Tai Chi, especially when you were having him up here quite a few times towards the end of his life, and he was teaching the cloud hands and the Tai
I
Chi
mean,
here?
uh, Bob's biggest thing, I think, that at least I picked up on was how to use uh, body alignment, particularly with the spine, and how to use that to develop like internal power. So there was how to, just by having a straight spine and keeping your body relaxed, basically the other person just bounces off of you. And so it was a lot of the stuff that was, um, you know, it, he was good before he met Bruce, but then he took Bruce's stuff and really incorporated it into what he already knew. And that, I think, uh, like a lot of other people, when you have that combination of, another system that's, has more of the movement and like, the curriculum stuff
Mm.
of just the more, just how to, all the physical stuff, right? Because Bruce doesn't really teach a lot of physical stuff. So if you already know how to do applications and push hands and things like that, and then you come to Bruce, you can just plug it in and it's like boom. Where, for me, it was like I learned it from Bruce, so I didn't have anything else to plug it into. It was just sort of, I learned it from him. So, but I could see always with the people that were, that had a knowledge base when they came in, it was like, in 2 or 3 years, they could learn everything they needed to learn from Bruce in terms of alignment and, and that sort of thing. And then just apply it to the form that they already practiced, and I think that was part of the why the Energy Gates book is the way it is in this sort of, it's not
Mm.
Wu style. It's
Absolutely.
not Wu. It's not Wu style cloud hands or Yang style cloud hands or Chen style. It's very much this sort of uh, over the counter type of like
Yeah.
generic version of cloud hands, because I think his goal was really to um, talk about the principles, not the form.
That always seems
Because
to
a
be
lot,
his approach.
yeah, well, because a lot of people talk about form, and it's what Eric said in the interview about the reason he focused on dissolving is because lots of other people did things like breathing and relaxing, but nobody was really talking about dissolving. So same sort of thing. I think it was take the pieces that are missing from the paradigm of the Tai Chi world at that time and try to up the level of the whole thing, and I think that's uh you could really see it, like when that before that book came out, nobody really ever used the word qua. Very few people talked about uh doing a conscious scanning of the body while standing. those things were out there, but nobody really like had put it down on paper yet. And I think that once it was sort of put down in paper and if you will, distributed to the masses, a lot of people were able to like tap into things like body alignment that maybe had been missing from their practice earlier on.
So moving ahead to chapter on cloud hands, rooting in the lower body. Lesson 3 is about opening and closing the qua. Now, speaking of topics that weren't around that much that really got coined by this book, there's the qua, and that's it's a very detailed description anatomically and how it works. He talks about all the different components of the qua, the various muscles you've got, the inguinal groove and the lymph nodes there. I mean, there's just no limit. It really is a very maybe a rich area of the body. There's tendons, there's ligaments, there's cavities, there's lymph nodes, there's bones, adductors. There's tons of stuff all coming through this zone, and that's what makes it so important.
The term that was thrown around a lot in the Tai Chi world before that was Yao, which I guess means was waist.
Yeah, it's a pretty similar area, I think. Yao Qua.
But the way I understand it is that the waist is everything essentially from your belly button to your upper thigh, right? And that the qua is this very specific chunk of waist in the middle, right? So that little fold in your hip and the like space in front of your hip socket, that sort of squishy bit where you can stick your fingers in. And that's where, in terms of getting movement in there, it can do 3 things. It can fold like a hinge. It can bend in half, like bend forward and back, or fold side to side, or it can go up and down, right? So when you're just doing up and down, that's essentially what Bruce calls a Qua Squat, right? Which is different from a regular squat in that a regular squat is you're going up and down primarily with the muscles in your legs and bending your knees to go down and straightening your legs to come up. The Qua Squat is a squat simply from that area in your quad. Now, you can also bend your legs as you do it, but the amount that the hip socket opens and closes and the qua moves doesn't particularly, it can't get much bigger than it is when you do it by itself. So, the bit about, anybody who's done the stuff with us knows what we're talking about here, where you hold you hold the knees and you try to squat down without moving your knees forward. What most people end up doing is sticking, sort of leaning forward and sticking their butt back. And that's better than moving your knees, but that's still not really moving from the qua. And then, over time, what you get is this sense that much like the space in your armpit or, some other cavity in your body, that you start to have the ability to move it and consciously move it and to open and close it. And so it's not easy. It takes a bit of time to get that skill. But what ends the end result is that when you put your weight on your leg, you use the qua as like a shock absorber, and that takes the pressure rather than like your knee or your lower back. And this is probably, if you want to take one thing out of this book that's, probably the most useful, it's this. This is the thing that if you could sort of magically snap your fingers and everybody in the world would know how to squat properly, the number of people with back pain and hip pain and knee pain would probably drop in half. It's such a huge, psoas muscles die at the, sitting in a desk, right? So when you sit at a desk all day, the thing that's crumpling and getting contracted all day long is your psoas muscle. So doing something just like this like basic little squat can like do a ton of good for people just in terms of, their general health. Forget about doing, martial arts or even cloud hands.
I mean, for us, one of the main things that whenever we've taught together has been the Qua Squat. This exercise to try and isolate that squat, not so much to exercise as much as to get your mind into it and feel this particular area of your body. Like you said, you can do regular squats all day and like exercise the area, move blood through it, but to really isolate it and get that pulsation and that pump in the very qua itself takes some attention and awareness, and it's smaller than you think.
I think for a lot of people, to get a frame of reference, it's like if you take your arm and you pull your arm out from your shoulder, you can feel your shoulder, like, your shoulder blade pulls away from your spine and that space opens up. But you can't do that with your leg unless your foot's up in the air, right? So it's more like if you took your hand and you grab something and then you pull your elbow forward, that will also move your shoulder, but your hand's not going anywhere, right? And so it's this relationship to essentially keeping your knee still. Your foot obviously can't go anywhere because it's on the ground, but if you keep your knee and your foot still, when you squat, the only thing that, not the only thing, but the main thing that can move is your hip. And so it sort of isolates that compression and expansion in your hip. So, again, the alignment is going to create this thing, whether you can feel it or not. You just have to make sure you don't break the alignment, right?
So that's what he teaches here he's got, illustration of how to do the Qua Squat. And first you start with alignments of the knees and ankles. Then you check the alignment by sinking your hips to see if you can feel your hips directly pressing on the arch of your foot. All the weight and pressure should transfer through your knee and ankle joints to the foot. Bounce lightly, using your hips so that you can feel the spring in your legs. So that's that concept of bouncing in the quad a little bit to try and get a nice clean bounce from the foot up to the quad without being stiff.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I did in class this morning, actually.
Every class.
But you kind of zipped past it. But he says bouncing in the hip, right? Which is very different than bouncing on your knee or your ankle, right? So the first bit is just get that you can actually hold your knee and your ankle still, or relatively still, and actually get your hip to bounce, because it's a bit like if something's really tight, like a shoulder or something, and you kind of jiggle somebody's arm, eventually their shoulder will just kind of give up being as tight. The same sort of thing is happening. So, the repetition of the squat, in a sense, is like, it's like a rusty hinge, and you're just bending it and unbending it and bending it and unbending it until finally the oil gets to the inside of the hinge, and the rust starts to break up a little bit. So it's the same process. It's just you're talking about a space that's like really small. I mean, on a big on a big person, it's a centimeter, right? Like on someone like our size, but on most people, especially if it's tight, it might have the potential to be a centimeter, but its actual range of motion before something else goes out of alignment might be a quarter of a centimeter, So it's really about not necessarily how much can you move that one thing, but how much can you move that one thing without it disturbing something else,
So final advice here is saying squat down by gently squeezing your quad closed, and stand up by expanding or pushing your quad upward. Under no circumstances should you use your knees to power your squat.
There you go.
So that's it. The main advice being try to do an isolated Qua Squat. My sense is, hey, do some big ones, do some range of motion exercises, get whatever you can to get your hip moving. But if you want to do the Qua Squat, go ahead and really find, you're going to have to bring your mind in there in a pretty small space and pulsate that space.
I think, the more, the looser your leg muscles and your hip flexors and things like that are, absolutely, it's going to make it easier to do this. But, it really isn't the same stuff, right? The stuff that makes you able to like do a low squat or do the splits or squat down real low on one leg is it in one sense a different mechanism than what he's talking about here. You know, he says you just pull in your quad, which is this little space inside your hip, right? And you suck that in, sort of like if you suck in your cheeks, you get that feeling of pulling in. You can do the same thing with your hip. So you get the sense of pulling that thing in. And as it pulls in, you know, it's like if uh, it's like a shock absorber. And if the shock absorber shrinks, the two sides of the, you know, whatever the shock absorber is absorbing get closer together. So you're not doing anything with the top or the bottom. You're just taking that little space in the middle and shrinking it. And, you know, the thing with sucking in your cheeks was always the thing that Bruce did to kind of illustrate, like, if you want to get a sense of what it feels like in your hips, it's that. Now, I found that it was a lot easier to start with trying to do it with your shoulder. That if you can get a sense of opening and closing the space in your shoulder's nest, not pulling your arm out from your shoulder, like your arm is totally still, but the space in here just going in and out and in and out. So um, that, you know, kind of gives, I mean, it's not the same thing. It's a different, still, you know, close but no cigar kind of. But when you get into the hip, at least if you have a frame of reference, I mean, it could be your hand, could be a frame of reference. I mean, and somewhere, anywhere really. But you know, you have a sense of what it feels like to have that sort of squishy pulse, and you try to like transfer that feeling to your hip. It's really subtle, so it's easy to miss. You know, most people are somewhat tight in that area, so it's hard to, you know, move it. Just the physical, you know, range of motion can be tough.
I mean, my sense is if you do the thing where someone puts their hands on your knees and you work on your squat from there, that way your knees aren't wobbling all over the place. That to me is the best way to get the sense of what you're after. And so that brings us to the end of Cloud Hands rooting through the lower body. And next episode, we'll move into Cloud Hands spiraling the upper body.
All right.
Good talking to you.
Okay, bro. Take care. Hey, folks. It's Isaac again. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Just if you're interested in getting Bob's book, it's available on Blue Snake Books. Its title is Internal Structure of Cloud Hands, a Gateway to Advanced Tai Chi Practice. It's definitely worth checking it out. Okay, take care and like and subscribe.